Hello everyone, welcome to Greek Part 2, and we're beginning by learning about third declension nouns. First of all, I want to begin by explaining what this term declension means. Declension is a grammatical pattern of case endings that occurs within nouns. Put simply, it's the road that a noun takes to get from nominative to genitive to dative to accusative. So it's those set of case endings that we have observed with first and second declension nouns already, and what we're going to learn today with third declension nouns. Greek nouns are either first, second, or third declension. Let me just summarize for you the three declensions. We've learned first and second already. First declension nouns, where we begin, are largely feminine nouns, which end in alpha or eta. Two examples are aletheia and agape, truth and love. So their stem ends in an alpha or an eta, and you add endings onto these to create different cases. Second declension is the next stop that we made, and we found that they were masculine or neuter nouns whose stem ended in an omicron. Their lexical forms here maintain the omicron, and this represents a case ending. So for the nominative singular of a masculine, it's sigma. For the nominative singular of a neuter, it's noon. Whereas with first declension nouns, there was a zero ending in the nominative singular. Nothing was added. It was just the stem vowel. And of course, you added various endings to this omicron stem to create different cases. Third declension is a bit different in that it includes nouns of all three gender, masculine, feminine, neuter, which makes things a bit tricky, and they end in consonants. And we'll get to. Here's an example of a masculine third declension noun, pater. Here's an example of a feminine third declension noun, sarx. So this is father. This is flesh. And this is an example of a third declension neuter noun. And it is spirit. Or could be wind. Now again, we see these end in consonants. What about this? Well, we'll get to that. This is not its true stem. We'll see that a little later on in the lecture. So just kind of hang on with that. This is an example. This is the paradigm for a third declension feminine noun. And this happens to be sarx, and it means flesh. Now, a couple things I want to notice is the article is the same that you've learned already for feminine nouns. So just because we're learning a new declension pattern for a feminine noun doesn't mean we learn a new form of the article. So what you've learned already, hey, taste, te, tain, high, tone, tice, and tas, is the same throughout. What's a little different is the pattern of endings, the declension pattern that you see here. Sarx, sarkos, sarki, sarka, sarkez, sarkon, sarksin, and sarkas. So the endings are different. So for a nominative, it's a sigma, and we'll explain how we get to there. For a genitive, it's omicron sigma. For a dative, it's iota. For an accusative, it's alpha. For a nominative plural, it's epsilon sigma. For a genitive plural, it's omega noon, which is the same that we've seen before. For the dative plural, it's sin with a movable nu. And we'll talk about why we see an xi here instead of the sigma. And finally, the accusative plural is alpha sigma. So the two ones where they look a little different is the nominative singular and dative plural. Everywhere else we see what's called the true stem with the kappa in the case of sarx and the ending. So you're learning new endings, but you're also noting these changes that occur here. All right? which is an example of a neuter noun. So this is neuter, third declension, and this noun means name. Okay, so same as we've noted before, the article for neuter nouns remains the same. Ta, tu, to, ta, ta, ton, tois, and ta. So you've learned this pattern for the neuter noun that accompanies neuter nouns, the article that accompanies neuter nouns, but you have a different noun form. And this is the pattern for anima. Now, anima, whenever you see that ma on the end of a neuter third declension noun, know that it's neuter. And you get other neuter nouns that are third declension that behave exactly like this. So the word for spirit, pneuma, the word for body, soma, and the word for will, thelema. Thelema, that's a mu, sorry about that. All behave the same pattern. So anima, animatas, animati, anima, animata, amaton, animasin, and animata. So what's happening here? This is its true stem. It ends with a tau. But this neuter nouns in the third declension have a zero ending. So no ending gets put on. Just a blank. And a tau can't stand on the end of a word in Greek, so it drops out. So that's why you get anima. And just like we saw in second declension nouns, the neuter forms, the nominative and the accusative are exactly the same. And this is true for singular and plural. So zero ending, omicron sigma, gets added on to the T, iota gets added on after the tau, and then zero ending, the tau drops. Alpha dropped off, we see the tau and the alpha gets stuck on, omega noon, and then sin, the T drops because it's a dental, and the sin comes along, knocks it off, and of course the alpha. So those are the new endings for a neuter third declension noun. Remember back to the good old days when we were dealing with just first and second declension nouns. Weren't they wonderful? This is an example of a second declension noun. And remember that we see logos here, and we just add new endings on. Logu, and we lengthen that final vowel and subscript the iota, and we get logo. And then logon, we add a new on the end, and we get the accusative singular. And that pattern exists as we move over to the plural forms. That made life easy. Memorize the lexical form, and then you can go from there. And that's second declension nouns. First declension nouns ended in eta or an alpha, and we just added endings to there too. So memorize the lexical form, add the endings, and you're good. Logos and agape are good examples of those initial nouns that we learned. But the stem of a third declension noun is a little different. It ends in a consonant. And those consonants, as we've seen with sarx and anima, react to that sigma that's being added, react to its endings. And that's what makes things tricky and difficult. So that's the first thing about morphology that we should note. So learning the pattern for first and second declension nouns was rather straightforward. You learned the lexical form, you learned the case endings, and you added the case endings to the noun stem. That made life easy. Learning the pattern for third declension nouns is a little more challenging. For instance, the nominative singular does not show the noun stem because the final stem consonant changes when it encounters the nominative case ending and also the dative plural ending. For instance, the sigma reacts with the sigma and a zero ending reacts with that final consonant. But the good news is the genitive singular has the unaltered noun stem with the case ending. So you can look at that and you can see the stem right away. So pay attention to the genitive. Here's an example from the Greek New Testament of sarx, which is flesh. Notice that the actual stem ending ends with a kappa. So we see that throughout the paradigm. Sarki, sarka, sarkes, sarkon, sarkas. The two areas where it's different is the nominative singular and the dative plural. It's because the kappa at the end of the stem reacts with the sigma to create an xi. So sark becomes sarx, and sarxin becomes sarkin, sarksin becomes sarxin. The kappa and the sigma come together. So pay attention to the lexical entry that you see at the end of the book. For instance, you've observed sarx, and if you look at the vocab section, you'll see sarx, sarkos, and hey. Three pieces of information that are important. First, you see sarx, which is the nominative form, which is defined as its lexical form. Next, you see the genitive form, sarkos, where you see the true stem, sigma, alpha, rho, and kappa. And you see the case ending for the genitive singular added to that, omicron, sigma. But that stem is what you see throughout the paradigm for the most part. And finally, you see the article, hey, which indicates that it's feminine. And when you're trying to find out gender or determine gender, that's a helpful thing. So here's a summary of the changes that we have observed with respect to sarx and the addition of the endings for the third declension. And we've covered pretty much everything here, noting the change is what happened when a kappa and a sigma get together to create an xi, and in the dative plural as well. Next, we want to talk a little bit about a neuter noun like pneuma or anima or soma. Here we see that its true stem has a tau, and when the tau encounters a sigma, it drops off. Just a reminder, pneuma means spirit or wind. And that's its lexical form, pneuma, but its true stem has a tau on the end. And that tau drops off. It maintains throughout the whole paradigm. So pneumatos, pneumati, pneumata, and pneumasin. Also note that like the second declension nouns, the neuter nouns, the nominative and accusative singular are the same, both in the singular and in the plural. That first ending is a zero ending, and the tau drops off when there's a zero ending. And when we get down to the rest of the paradigm, we see the tau and the endings, pneumatos, pneumati, and in the nominative plural, pneumata, pneumatone, and the dative plural is where we see some issues here. The tau drops off, because of the sigma. Note as well, the nominative and accusative of the plural forms are the same. So that's the pattern for the neuter. So just some things to note. The dative singular has an iota throughout all the declensions we've seen, first, second, and third. And the only difference is, unlike the first and second, which subscript the iota, in the dative singular, the iota sticks alongside of the stem. Also to note, the dative plural has a movable nu. So sometimes you'll see sarx in, sometimes you'll see sarxi. And also, the dative plural has the same stem change as we saw in the nominative singular. A kappa plus a sigma produces an xi, and in anima, it dropped because the nominative singular dropped because it was the end of a noun. In the dative plural, it drops because it encounters a sigma, and that's the way all dentals respond. Also note the genitive plural has the same ending as the first and second declension forms, an omega nu. That's almost universal. So that's a good thing to remember. Also note, as we've noted already, the neuter nominative and neuter accusative forms have the same ending, both in the singular and the plural. And secondly, all those third declension nouns that end in mu, alpha, ma, are usually neuter. So I've put 3 there, onema, pneuma, and soma. Also, thelema. Just a note, there are some third declension nouns that have what are called archaic letters. That is, letters that existed in earlier forms of the Greek language, but by the time we get to the Koine period, their presence was gone. They weren't visibly there, but their presence was still felt. So 2 examples are the digamma, which is like an F, a lower F, and a consonantal iota. And examples of a consonantal iota are pistis and polis. Pistis is faith, polis is city. And we've noted this already. Certain groups of consonants, labials, palatals, velators, and dentals, can be organized together to show their reactions to an added sigma, which occurs within the nominative singular and in the dative plural. So this is important. We saw this very same thing happen when we were dealing with verbs, especially the first aorist and the future. So we're looking at labials, which are letters that are made, consonants that are made with the lips. So pi, beta, and phi, when they encounter a sigma, become a psi. Palatals, which are made at the back of the throat, k, g, and k. When they encounter sigma, they become an xi. And finally, dentals, tau, delta, or theta, when they encounter sigma, drop, and they just become sigma. So here's a final chart that you will find in your book. You'll also find on my handout, which explains some of these unusual patterns. So you get a kappa stem, which we've seen already, a mat stem, which is pneuma, but also a delta or T stem. So this is the example of caritas, grace. Okay, when a sigma is added, the T drops, and you get charis, as we see in the nominative singular. And there's an alternative accusative singular plural, charin. Where we expect to see kara, we see charin, which is simply a nu on the end. This is probably because we see a shift to kind of second declension forms first declension forms in the Greek, with the nu ending. So this is an example of a consonantal iota, where the consonantal iota as a letter is gone, but the vocalic iota shows up. And here we see the iota shifts to an epsilon in some of the endings. So we see, for instance, this is pistis, it means faith. We see, for instance, in the genitive singular, the shift from an iota to an epsilon and the lengthening of that omicron to an omega, so it's pisteos. And the dative singular, it's simply it's epsilon plus an iota with the dative on the end. And the accusative singular is simply an alternative ending, like what we saw with before with charis. It's pistin. Another indication that we see a subtle shift to first declension forms in feminine nouns from third declension. The nominative plural is a case of contraction, where we see the epsilon at the end of the stem contract with the epsilon sigma to create ace, so pistes. And then the genitive plural is pisteon. The dative plural is pistesin. And here is an unusual one. We see in the case of pistis, the accusative and the nominative are exactly the same. So I've got final 2 unusual ones here, an epsilon sigma stem and an epsilon digamma stem. So this is a neuter noun that means nation. And in the plural forms, it often gets translated as Gentiles. Context will determine it, but oftentimes it's meant to signify all non-Jewish groups, nations, the nations, kind of like the Hebrew word goyim, ethne. So what do we see here? Well, in the nominative singular, all they say in the textbook is the epsilon shifts to an omicron. So epsilon shifts to an omicron, add a sigma. In the genitive form, we see some contraction. The epsilon gets together with the omicron sigma and becomes us. In the dative singular, the sigma drops because it's between two vowels, and you get ethne. And in the accusative singular, it's ethnos because it's a neuter noun, and it's the same as nominative singular. In the nominative plural, you see ethne. Again, the sigma drops, the epsilon and the alpha collide. And then in the genitive plural, ethnon, the sigma drops and the omega simply takes over, knocks the epsilon out of the way. In the dative plural, the sigma drops and you get ethnesin. And finally, in the accusative plural, it's the same as the nominative singular. Basileos means king. In the textbook, they simply call it an epsilon digamma. And really what it is it's an EU stem. So this EU ending stem is really for all kind of occupations. Digamma is really this consonant that kind of holds over, and it kind of shows up. It doesn't show up, but it kind of dictates how endings are put on. But really, the epsilon, upsilon is the kind of the main stem here. The upsilon disappears, and really it's the epsilon digamma that is the true kind of ending. So we see basilus, basileos, basile, basileia, okay, with the alpha, basileis, basileon, basilelusin, and basileis. So again, this is a masculine noun and it means king. And that's all there is to the third declension. There's lots more to learn about the third declension, but that is the kind of the main gist of the third declension. So remember, you're learning a new set of endings, and you're also noting how these endings collide and combine with the consonantal ending of the noun stem, which really only affects the nominative singular and the dative plural. So keep studying, and I'll see you in class.